criminal defense attorney, how would you defend Nick Reiner?
The obvious plea is going to be not guilty by reason of insanity. It's not easy to prove,
this weekend's deaths of filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife Michele. In the aftermath of this terrible tragedy, our Ben Mankiewicz offers an appreciation of Reiner's unparalleled career and life in the movies.
What if the love you give to protect your child becomes the very thing that destroys your family? Today on Forever Fame TV, we're uncovering a heartbreaking story of fame, silence, unconditional love, and a confession that came too late. This isn't just a Hollywood tragedy, it's a warning hidden behind perfect smiles. To the public, Rob Reiner and Michele Singer appeared untouchable. 36 years of marriage, red carpet appearances, and a love story that looked timeless. They were seen as proof that real love could survive anything. Every photo showed stability, warmth, and unity. But behind that polished image, something far heavier was quietly unfolding. Because silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes, silence is pain that's been ignored for too long. In Rob Reiner's final CBS interview, filmed just weeks before his death, that silence finally broke. Behind closed doors were sleepless nights, whispered arguments, and constant fear centered around one devastating reality: their son Nick's addiction. Rob admitted they didn't stay together because life was easy. They stayed because of their children. Because walking away felt like tearing apart the last thing holding their family together. Love became their anchor, even as exhaustion slowly consumed them both. When Rob sat down for that interview, no one realized they were witnessing his final confession. He wasn't there to promote a film or celebrate a legacy. He said quietly, "I'm here because it's time to tell the truth, especially about my family." Under the studio lights, the confident Hollywood figure was gone. What remained was a fragile father worn down by years of quiet endurance. He spoke about his home, the same house magazines once praised as perfect. But inside those walls, Rob said, lived years of silence so heavy it became unbearable. "I thought silence meant peace," he reflected. "But silence can also mean abandonment." That sentence hit the room like a shockwave. Rob admitted his work consumed him. Directing, writing, chasing perfection, while Michele slowly drifted into emotional distance. Not from lack of love, but from exhaustion. The absence wasn't loud. It was quiet, and that made it more dangerous. He then reflected on how everything began in 1989 on the set of When Harry Met Sally. When Michele Singer walked in, Rob said something clicked instantly. That love even changed the movie itself. The original ending was tragic, but after meeting Michele, Rob rewrote it into hope. Just months later, they married in Hawaii with only 2 strangers as witnesses. "She made me whole," Rob said. But even then, cracks were forming quietly. As parents, Rob and Michele were opposites. Rob was gentle and protective. Michele believed in structure and boundaries. For years, that balance worked until Nick began to change. Nick started coming home late. Money requests increased. His eyes no longer looked the same. Rob saw the signs but told himself it was just a phase. Michele wanted limits. Rob wanted to protect. That difference slowly became the center of every argument. As Nick's addiction worsened, the home turned into a battlefield. Rob recalled nights when Nick screamed at the door. One night, Nick shoved him against a wall while Michele stood frozen in fear. When asked why he never called the police, Rob whispered, "Because I'm a father." He was terrified. Afraid of destroying Nick's future. Afraid of the media. Afraid his son would be labeled forever. But deep down, Rob knew the truth: love alone isn't always enough to save someone. The hardest part wasn't the chaos. It was opening the door again afterward, still hoping this time would be different. "I knew I was being used," Rob admitted. "But if I said no, I'd lose him." That's when love turned into something dangerous. As Rob tried harder to protect Nick, he and Michele drifted further apart. Not because they stopped loving each other, but because love was pulling them in opposite directions. Michele finally said what Rob couldn't face. "We can't live like this anymore." One night, Michele reached for the phone to call the police. Rob stepped in front of her, begging her not to. She broke down and said the words that changed everything. "You're choosing him and leaving me behind." Both of them were right, and that's what made it unbearable. Rob chose silence, hoping it would hold the family together. But silence only delayed the collapse. Later, he admitted, "Families don't fall apart from one big tragedy. They fall apart from thousands of small moments we ignore." Near the end of the interview, Rob looked directly into the camera and spoke softly. If you're watching, I understand now. I just understood too late. Those became his final words on television. Weeks later, the unthinkable happened.
The Los Angeles Police Department is now conducting an investigation at this residence here on Chadbourne, and that investigation will continue over the coming days.
On December 14th, Rob Reiner and Michele Singer were found lifeless in their home. Their son Nick, the child Rob spent his life trying to protect, was arrested in connection with their deaths. Everything Rob feared had come true. When CBS reared that interview, it no longer felt like reflection. It felt like a farewell. The perfect family image shattered, and viewers everywhere asked themselves the same haunting question. How many families are smiling for the world while silently falling apart behind closed doors? Rob Reiner's love was unconditional, too unconditional. His story became a modern tragedy and a warning about what happens when love has no limits, when silence replaces action, and when help comes too late. So here's the question he leaves behind. How far would you go to protect the people you love? When does protection turn into enabling? And can love alone really save someone who doesn't want to be saved?
Bad news? What else? We get out of Vietnam or something? Don't be a wise guy, huh?
If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because somewhere out there, someone may need to hear this before it's too late. This is Forever Fame TV.
One of the most creatively satisfying experiences any actor could have.
As the public tried to process the tragedy, one question echoed louder than any headline. How did a family built on love, success, and good intentions collapse so completely? The answer wasn't simple, and that's what made it so haunting. This wasn't a story of sudden evil. It was a story of slow erosion, years of fear, denial, and love without boundaries.
First you have to be friends. You have to like each other. Then your neck. This could go on for years.
In the days following Rob and Michelle's deaths, media outlets replayed Rob's final
I took it because Nora Ephron is directing. She's a friend, and you do things for friends.
interview again and again. Each viewing revealed something new. His pauses, the way his voice softened when he spoke about his children,
If I give you any more collagen, your lips are going to look like they got stuck in a pool drain.
the exhaustion in his eyes. What once felt like reflection now felt like a warning no one had heard in time. Friends close to the family later
$26,000 worth of sides? What are these sides that cure cancer?
Well, what's more unbelievable, that Leonardo DiCaprio's a Jew or that I'm his father?
revealed that Rob had carried guilt quietly for years. Not the loud kind of guilt that demands forgiveness, but the silent kind that settles into your bones. He blamed himself for not acting sooner, for confusing love with rescue, for believing that patience alone could fix what required intervention. Michele, on the other hand, had been fighting a different battle. Those close to her said she lived in constant tension, torn between compassion and self-preservation. She loved her children fiercely, but she also believed in accountability. And that belief often left her standing alone, feeling unheard inside her own home. The strain didn't only affect Nick. Their other children felt it too, even if they never spoke publicly about it. Growing up in a house where fear lived quietly changes you.
I will have imparted to you all the wisdom that I have acquired in my 70-plus years on this.
It teaches you to read moods instead of words, to measure love by how much trouble you're causing, and to stay silent when things feel unsafe. Rob once admitted that his greatest fear wasn't losing his career or reputation. It was losing his children emotionally. He believed that saying no would push them away forever. What he didn't realize was that always saying yes was slowly erasing himself. Psychologists later weighed in, explaining how parental enabling often comes from trauma, not weakness. When a parent sees their child as fragile or broken, they unconsciously try to absorb the pain for them. But pain doesn't disappear when you carry it for someone else.
Really what motivated me to do Misery, because there's a lot of humor in it. There's a lot of laughs in Misery, but it also has a dark side, which I have as well. And I wanted to see if I could find a way to marry those two sides.
He's the best. He really is. He's smart, and he's funny, and he knows exactly what he wants, and he knows how to get it.
It multiplies. Nick's downward spiral didn't happen overnight.
You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Addiction rarely announces itself clearly. It disguises itself as stress, rebellion, sadness, or experimentation. And by the time it becomes undeniable, the family is already exhausted, confused, and emotionally bankrupt.
Rob Reiner is so talented. You know, you look at his films, he's never made a bad movie, and and he loves actors.
If there's some Oscars and nominations or whatever, that's always nice. But I mean, hopefully people will enjoy the film. That's the main thing.
Rob and Michele argued in whispers not because they didn't care, but because they were afraid of being overheard. They tried to protect the image of stability for their children, not realizing that children sense instability even when no one speaks it out loud. At some point, love turned into fear management. Every decision was made to avoid the worst-case scenario. And ironically, that constant avoidance created the very outcome they were running from. Experts say families often wait too long to seek help.
It's an amazing cast. Jennifer is as good as it gets when it comes to romantic comedies.
What was it like getting Kevin and Jennifer to kiss?
I don't think they had a problem.
It was not too shabby.
You pay them money. You pay them a good salary, and they do what they're supposed to do.
Last time I had sex, I tore my ACL.
Is this by any chance some pathetic attempt at flirtation?
Because admitting the problem feels like failure. For Rob, asking for help felt like admitting he couldn't save his son.
They were incredible. Chemistry has to be there with a romantic comedy, and it was there right from the get-go.
And for a man whose life was built on storytelling and control, that felt unbearable. Michele tried to sound the alarm more than once. But each time she did, the cost felt too high. A call to the police, public exposure, the possibility of losing Nick forever. She was forced to choose between safety and guilt, a choice no parent should have to make alone. When the tragedy finally occurred,
I'm very fortunate in that I have my own company. If there's a film I want to make, it's pretty much I get a chance to make it until somebody pulls the plug on us.
it shattered the illusion that silence had been protecting anyone. The very thing Rob believed was holding the family together had actually isolated them from the help they needed. In the aftermath,
There's anything wrong with that?
I really have devoted myself, and I've jumped in with both.
viewers around the world connected deeply with Rob's words. Not because he was famous, but because his struggle felt painfully familiar. Many parents recognized themselves in his fear. Many partners saw their own unspoken arguments mirrored in his story. People began sharing their own experiences online, stories of addiction, denial, enabling, and regret. The comments section became a collective confession booth, proof that this wasn't just a Hollywood tragedy. It was a human one. What made Rob's story especially heartbreaking was that his intentions were pure. He didn't ignore the problem because he didn't care. He ignored it because he cared too much. Because he believed love could outweigh addiction. Because he believed patience was the same as healing. But love without boundaries doesn't heal. It exhausts. And boundaries without compassion don't heal either. They hardened. Rob and Michele stood on opposite sides of the same fear, both trying to save their family, but speaking different emotional languages. Instead of working together, they slowly became strangers fighting the same storm alone. The tragedy also forced society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Wealth, fame, and access don't make families immune to pain. If anything, they sometimes add layers of pressure and denial. When the world expects perfection, admitting brokenness feels like failure. Rob once said that storytelling was his way of understanding the world. In his final interview, he wasn't telling a story for applause. He was telling it because he hoped someone else might listen and act sooner than he did. His confession wasn't about blame. It was about honesty, about naming the quiet choices that shape our lives more than dramatic moments ever do. And perhaps the most haunting part of all was this: Rob didn't see himself as a victim. He saw himself as complicit. Not through cruelty, but through fear, through silence, through delay. That kind of self-awareness is rare. And it's what made his words linger long after the screen went dark. Today, Rob and Michele's legacy isn't just found in films, activism, or awards. It lives in the conversations their story sparked, in families asking harder questions, in parents reconsidering what love really means. Because love isn't just protection. Sometimes, love is intervention. Sometimes, it's letting someone face consequences. And sometimes, it's admitting you can't fix everything alone. Rob Reiner's final message wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. It was raw. And maybe that's why it mattered so much. He didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't ask to be understood. He simply told the truth, hoping that truth might reach someone else in time. So if there's one lesson buried inside this tragedy, it's this: silence feels safe, but it rarely is. And love, no matter how powerful, needs honesty to survive. If you're watching this and see pieces of your own life reflected back at you, don't ignore that feeling. Talk, ask for help, set boundaries, speak before silence becomes permanent. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't loving someone, it's loving them enough to do what scares you most. As the weeks passed, the shock didn't fade, it settled. What initially felt like disbelief turned into a heavy, lingering sadness. People weren't just mourning Rob Reiner and Michele Singer. They were mourning the idea that love, even when genuine, doesn't always save us from tragedy. Mental health professionals began discussing the case publicly, not to sensationalize it, but to explain it. They spoke about how families living with addiction often become trapped in survival mode. Every day becomes about keeping the peace, avoiding explosions, and delaying consequences. Over time, this way of living feels normal, even when it's destroying everyone involved. Rob's fear was rooted in something deeply human. He believed that if he stopped protecting Nick, the world would punish him mercilessly. Jail, public shame, a permanent label. What Rob didn't realize was that avoidance was already punishing all of them, just more slowly. Michele understood this before Rob did, and that understanding came at a cost. Living with constant anxiety changes a person. Friends later said Michele became quieter, more guarded. Not weaker, but tired. Tired of being the only one willing to say what everyone else was afraid to face. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being right too early. Michele carried that loneliness for years. Their marriage didn't collapse from lack of love. It collapsed from emotional imbalance. Rob was giving endlessly to his children, while Michele felt she was losing her partner in the process. Over time, resentment quietly replaced companionship. Yet neither of them wanted to leave, because leaving would feel like failure. And because deep down, both believed tomorrow might finally be different. That belief, maybe tomorrow, is one of the most dangerous illusions addiction creates. Nick, meanwhile, wasn't just a villain in this story. He was a young man drowning, surrounded by people who loved him but didn't know how to stop the fall. Addiction strips people of clarity, empathy, and restraint. It doesn't excuse actions, but it explains how families get trapped in cycles they never intended. Rob once said that he kept seeing the child Nick used to be. That image never left him. And that's what made every boundary feel like betrayal. Experts later explained that parents often grieve twice in these situations. First, they grieve the child they once knew. Then they grieve the reality they didn't want to accept. Rob was stuck between those two griefs, unable to move forward or backward. Michele grieved differently. She grieved the life she was losing, the safety of her home, the trust in her family, the partnership she once had with Rob. And when those losses pile up without relief, something inside you begins to shut down. The tragedy forced many viewers to reflect on their own families. People began asking questions they'd avoided for years. Are we helping or enabling? Are we protecting or avoiding? Are we silent because we're calm or because we're afraid? That's why Rob's interview hit so deeply. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional manipulation. It was quiet honesty, the kind that makes you uncomfortable because it feels personal. One moment stood out to many viewers. When Rob was asked if he would do anything differently, he paused longer than at any other point. That pause said more than words ever could. It was the pause of someone replaying years of choices in their mind. "I thought I had time," he finally said. That sentence became the most haunting takeaway, because time is the one thing families in crisis always think they have, until they don't. Hollywood has no shortage of tragic stories, but this one felt different. There were no villains, no scandals, no obvious warning signs from the outside. Just people trying and failing to love their way through something bigger than them. After the memorial broadcast, counselors and support organizations reported increased calls. Parents, spouses, siblings, people who recognized the same patterns forming in their own lives and didn't want to wait until it was too late. In that sense, Rob and Michele's story didn't end in silence. It cracked something open. Their legacy became a conversation about boundaries, courage, and the cost of denial. Rob Reiner spent his career telling stories that made people feel understood. In the end, his most important story wasn't scripted. It was lived, and shared only when the weight became unbearable. Michele Singer's legacy, too, deserves recognition. She was more than a supporting figure. She was a woman shaped by resilience, justice, and moral clarity. She believed in facing hard truths, even when they hurt. And history suggests she may have been the one trying hardest to save everyone involved. Together, they represented a truth we often avoid. Love isn't enough without action. Compassion isn't effective without boundaries. And silence doesn't protect, it delays. Their story forces us to ask questions we don't like asking. About family, about responsibility, about when helping turns into harm. And maybe that's why this story matters. Not because of how it ended, but because of how long it took to face the truth. If Rob could speak one more time, his message wouldn't be about regret. It would be about courage. The courage to intervene, to ask for help, to choose discomfort over denial. Because love should never mean disappearing yourself. And if Michele could speak, perhaps she'd remind us that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like the person willing to say, "This can't continue." This is why their story stays with us. It isn't entertainment, it's a mirror. And the question it leaves behind is simple, but terrifying. If silence feels easier today, what will it cost tomorrow? In the aftermath of the tragedy, one uncomfortable realization settled into the public consciousness. This was not a story that began with violence. It began with fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of judgment, fear of losing someone you love before you're ready to let go. And that fear quietly shaped every decision along the way. Many experts later pointed out that families dealing with addiction often live in a constant state of emotional emergency. When every day feels like crisis prevention, long-term thinking disappears. You stop asking, "What's healthy?" and start asking, "What will keep things calm today?" Rob lived in that space for years, mistaking short-term peace for long-term safety. What made Rob's struggle so relatable was that he never believed he was doing the wrong thing. In his mind, he was being a good father. He was staying, he was forgiving, he was protecting. Those are the qualities society praises. Rarely do we warn people about the dangers hidden inside them. Michele, however, sensed that something essential was being lost. Not just safety, but dignity. Not just order, but truth. She understood that love without limits slowly becomes chaos, and chaos eventually turns into harm. That understanding isolated her. When one partner sees the danger clearly and the other can't, loneliness grows inside the relationship. Over time, their conversations became careful instead of honest. Every sentence was weighed. Every disagreement felt dangerous. They weren't avoiding conflict because they didn't care. They were avoiding it because they cared too much and were afraid of what might break if they pushed too hard. This emotional paralysis is something many families recognize but rarely name. It's the feeling of being stuck between love and fear, between hope and reality. You know something is wrong, but you're terrified that addressing it will make everything worse. Rob once admitted that part of him believed endurance was strength, that if he could just withstand the pain long enough, things would eventually turn around. But endurance without change doesn't heal wounds. It only teaches people how much you're willing to tolerate. As the years passed, Rob's identity slowly shifted. He wasn't just a filmmaker or a husband anymore. He became a buffer, absorbing shock, smoothing over damage, cleaning up emotional messes. And in doing so, he lost touch with his own limits. Michele watched this happen with growing concern. She saw her partner shrinking, not physically, but emotionally. The man who once spoke with certainty now hesitated. The storyteller who once shaped endings now avoided conclusions. She felt like she was losing him to a role neither of them had chosen. Their home became quiet in a different way. Not peaceful, careful. Everyone was walking on invisible glass. And when a house reaches that stage, the damage is already deep. Nick, at the center of it all, was not untouched by this tension. Addiction thrives in silence and confusion. It feeds on mixed messages. On one hand, unconditional support. On the other, unspoken resentment. That emotional inconsistency creates instability, not safety. Rob believed he was shielding Nick from consequences. But consequences don't disappear when ignored. They grow, they wait, and eventually they arrive without warning. One of the most painful truths Rob shared was that he knew, on some level, that things were out of control. But knowing something and accepting it are very different things. Acceptance would have required action, and action would have required risking everything he was trying to protect. This is where many viewers felt the deepest connection, because how many people live in that same space, knowing something is wrong, feeling it every day, but choosing comfort over confrontation because the alternative feels unbearable. Rob's final interview wasn't a performance. It was a release. For the first time, he allowed himself to say what he had been holding back for decades. And that honesty came with grief, not just for what happened, but for what might have been different. When the interviewer asked whether he believed things could have changed, Rob didn't answer immediately. That pause carried the weight of years. Then he said something simple and devastating. "I don't know. I never tried the hard way." That sentence haunted viewers because it reframed everything. The hard way wasn't punishment or abandonment. It was honesty, boundaries, intervention. Asking for help before things reached a breaking point. Michele, in many ways, represented that hard way. And perhaps that's why she felt so alone. Being the voice of reality in a family built on hope is exhausting. And when reality is repeatedly postponed, it begins to feel like betrayal. Their story also exposed how society misunderstands love. We glorify sacrifice even when it's self-destructive. We praise loyalty even when it enables harm. We admire patience even when it delays necessary change. Rob didn't fail because he loved too little. He failed because he loved without limits and without support. And Michele didn't fail because she wanted boundaries. She failed because she had to carry that burden largely alone. After the tragedy, many families began asking new questions. Not just how could this happen, but what are we avoiding right now? What conversations are we postponing because they feel uncomfortable? What behaviors are we excusing because confronting them feels cruel? The most unsettling realization was this: nothing about this story felt impossible. It felt familiar. That's what made it terrifying. Rob Reiner's legacy is no longer just cinematic. It's cautionary, not because he was careless or cruel, but because he was human. He made choices driven by fear, hope, and love, the same forces that guide most of us. Michele Singer's legacy, too, stands as a reminder that strength often looks like discomfort. That caring deeply sometimes means saying things others don't want to hear. And that silence, even when well-intentioned, can be dangerous. Their story doesn't offer easy answers. It offers difficult questions. And perhaps that's its true purpose. Because families don't collapse in moments. They erode in patterns, in habits, in decisions made repeatedly with the best intentions and the worst outcomes. If there is one truth this story leaves behind, it's this: love needs structure to survive. It needs honesty to stay healthy. And it needs courage, not just to hold on, but to let go of what no longer helps. Rob once said that storytelling was about revealing what people hide from themselves. In the end, his own story did exactly that for millions of people watching. And maybe that's where meaning begins. Not in the tragedy itself, but in what we choose to do with the truth it revealed. This is Forever Fame TV, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. And where the hardest truths are the ones worth facing before it's too late.